Now that we have a better understanding of what middlewares are in Redux, let's start to discuss exactly what Redux Thunk does. All right, so in this diagram right here, I have some normal rules around action creators. So these are the normal behaviors expected of an action creator inside of a vanilla Redux application, essentially the exact same Redux app that we are working on right now. So inside of a normal Redux application, an action creator must return an action object. That action object must be a plain JavaScript object that has a type property and optionally can also have a payload as well. So how does Redux Thunk work? Redux Thunk essentially is going to relax these rules right here around an action creator. Now you might be kind of surprised, Redux Thunk itself is not going to have anything like intrinsically built into it that says, oh yeah, just pass me some request object and I'll take it away for you. That's not the purpose of Redux Thunk. Redux Thunk is an all-purpose middleware that allows us to deal with asynchronous action creators, but it also allows us to do many other things as well. So one thing that Redux Thunk does is allow us to handle action creators, but that is not its primary purpose. And because of that, you're going to see that how Redux Thunk changes the rules of our action creator is kind of a little underwhelming almost. All right, so let's take a look here. So these are the rules around an action creator once we have installed Redux Thunk. This is literally it right here. This is the only change that Redux Thunk makes to your application. With Redux Thunk installed, your action creator can return an action object. If you return an action object, it still must have a type property. And if it is an action object that gets returned, it again optionally can have a payload as well. The other thing that Redux Thunk does, it allows you to return either an action object or a function. And if you return a function, Redux Thunk is going to automatically call that function for you. That's it. That is all Redux Thunk does. And as a matter of fact, you and I are going to take a look at the source code for Redux Thunk in just a little bit, and I'll prove that to you. I will prove to you that this is the only thing that Redux Thunk does. It allows you to return a function from an action creator, and if you do, Redux Thunk is going to invoke or call that function automatically. So essentially, if we put this into code form, or we get an understanding or an idea of what Redux Thunk allows us to do, basically, we can return a function that is going to have some logic inside of it like so. That is it. That is all that this thing does. So you might be thinking, okay, how does this help us exactly? How does returning a function and having it be called, how does that help us at all? Well, let me tell you a little bit more about what Redux Thunk is really doing behind the scenes, and then I think this will start to make a little bit more sense as to how it's going to fix our problem. Okay, so I'm going to flip back over to a new diagram. Now this one's a little bit crazy. This is a flow diagram of what Redux Thunk is doing internally. So we're going to zoom into this thing and we'll go through it step by step. Okay, so it all starts off up here when we call an action creator. So our action creator is going to return like an action. And I put that in double quotes because we're going to essentially say it can return either an object or a function. So maybe rather than action, I should say something. And I'll update it down here as well. So now when we return an action creator, it's going to return something that is either an object or a function. We're still going to take that something and pass it into the dispatch function. Now remember, whenever we dispatch something, the dispatch function is going to send that thing onto the middleware. So after we return this something or dispatch it, it's going to eventually end up inside of Redux Thunk. And then inside of Redux Thunk is going to take a look at that something, and it's going to say, oh, hey, welcome. Are you a function or are you an object? If this is an object right here, so no, it's not a function. If this is an object, then Redux Thunk is going to say, hey, you know what? Thanks for stopping by. I'm glad you visited, but I don't really care to deal with you at all. And so Redux Thunk is going to take any object that shows up and pass it along to all the different reducers inside of your application. So with Redux Thunk, we still can return action objects as usual. Redux Thunk is not going to involve itself in normal action objects in any way, shape, or form. Redux Thunk only starts to get interesting if we return a function instead. So if we return a function right here, we're going to start to go into this alternate flow. So if we return a function, Redux Thunk is going to say, oh, fantastic, I'm happy that you're here, I'm happy that you're a function. Redux Thunk invokes our function, and it passes into it the dispatch and the get state functions. as arguments. So in other words, with this function right here that we returned, we are going to receive dispatch and get state as arguments. Now the dispatch function is the same dispatch function that we've been talking about quite a bit. We can pass actions into the dispatch function. Those actions will be sent through all of our different middlewares and then eventually forwarded off to our reducers. So the dispatch function is essentially unlimited power to initiate changes to the data on the Redux side of our app. We've also seen this getState function very briefly back on that CodePen example as well. Remember, getState can be called on our Redux store, and that will return all of the data or all the state inside of our Redux store. So these two arguments that our function receives are essentially unlimited power over everything that goes on inside of our Redux application. Through dispatch, we can change any data we want, and through getState, we can read or access any data that we want. So let's imagine for a second that we do exactly what we're trying to do right here. We are trying to make a request inside this function. So we will imagine that Redux Thunk invokes our function with those two arguments. Then inside of our function, you and I are going to wait for our request to finish. So we're not going to be inside of this kind of race scenario that we were back in over here. We're going to wait to return or dispatch any action until we eventually get a response from our type-by-code API. Once we eventually get that response, we're then going to use the dispatch function to manually dispatch an action. That's the key part. That is the entire key right there. With Redux Thunk, we can manually dispatch an action at some point in time in the future. Now, when we dispatch an action, so we get this new action created right here. This can, again, that can be a plain JavaScript object or a function, but when we're dispatching it manually from Redux Thunk or inside of that function, it's basically always going to be a plain object. So we're going to dispatch this action. It's going to flow back into dispatch. Dispatch is going to send it right back into Redux Thunk. Redux Thunk is going to say, okay, are you a function or an object? In this case, it's going to be an object. So we're going to have Redux Thunk automatically forward that thing onto all of our different reducers. And that's pretty much it. So the real takeaway here is that with Redux Thunk, we can return a function. If we do, that function will be invoked with the dispatch and getState arguments. And with those two functions, we have unlimited power over our Redux store. We can change any data and we can read any data. And so at any point in time in the future, for example, after our request completes, we can then manually dispatch an action and update the data inside of our store. Okay, so that's pretty much everything about Redux Thunk. Now, the last thing I want to do very quickly, I know this is a long video, but I just want to show you this very quickly. I want to have you take a quick glance at the source code of Redux Thunk itself. So here's the link to the repository for Redux Thunk. I'm going to open up a new browser tab and navigate over there. So again, Redux Thunk repository. I'm going to find the src folder inside there. Inside of there, I'm going to find the single file that really makes up the source code for Redux Thunk, just this index.js file. And believe it or not, that is it. That is all of Redux Thunk right there, a total of 14 lines. And in reality, only like 6 or so lines actually do anything. All the other lines inside of here is, this right here is kind of like an extra object, or excuse me, an extra option. This is kind of an initialization step, and we've got a function declaration at the top and an export default at the bottom. So again, this right here, that is it. That is the whole shebang. That is all Redux Thunk really does. And you'll notice on line 2, there's some kind of crazy syntax right here. I know that looks nasty. Essentially what is happening there is we have a series of functions that return functions. Very similar to how right now you and I are defining a function that returns a function. But if you look in the body of that thing, you'll see the actual logic of what's going on. Redux Thunk is saying, okay, did you just return, or excuse me, did you just dispatch an action? If you did, is it a function? If it is a function, then Redux Thunk is going to invoke that action with dispatch and getState, and an optional extra argument, but you and I are not going to make use of that at any point in time. If our action was not a function, then Redux Thunk essentially says, oh, I don't care about this action, it's an object, I don't care about it, so I'm just going to send it on to either the next middleware or all the different reducers if there are no other middlewares to run. So that's it. It is amazingly simple and straightforward when you actually look at the source code. But of course, understanding it is a little bit more complicated. Okay, so now that we have a better understanding of exactly what Redux Thunk does, we'll take a quick pause. We'll come back in the next video, and we're going to do a refactor to our fetch post action creator to truly make use of Redux Thunk.